all of a sudden it's like, wow, that changed from, not doing it because of integrity, your family, stuff that you're holding yourself accountable for, until now it's about the consequences of not getting caught. And it's like, well, wow, that's a real shift in priority, because one, to me, is a great inspiration. I'm going to say inspiration for the first, because it's coming from the inside out. The other one is a very bad motivator, because if anybody's good with their mouth and they can build some trust with you and they can minimize those consequences, all of a sudden that's really not enough to hold weight. How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, this is a very good dialogue. We're going to have Connie, Alleyne, and Gary York share in. We're going to be talking about 5 factors that may come into play when a correctional staff compromises ethics. So we're not talking about people that already have that unethical mindset. We're talking about maybe some pressure, stuff like that can make someone make bad choices. And when it comes to talking about how we define what ethical and unethical is, I want people to know something. When someone does something unethical, it doesn't mean it's always illegal. So how we're going to define it is basically based on the golden rule. How I treat you is how I expect to be treated in return. So ethics is based on a well-founded standards of rights and wrongs that prescribe what humans ought to do, usually in terms of rights, obligations, benefits to society, fairness, or specific virtues. Being ethical is doing what the law requires, yes, but ethic also consists of the standards of behavior our society accepts. So there's a little bit more to it than just the legal side of things. So basically, for us in this dialogue, it's what we expect from each other, the behaviors that we expect from each other. Now, I got these 5 P's, and we'll go over them later, from John Maxwell's book. And when they asked him, would you like to do a book back in the day about business ethics? He goes, there's no such thing as business ethics. And they said, well, what do you mean by that? He goes, it's just ethics. It's just ethics. So I thought that was great, and that's what made me pick up the book. Now, real quick, guys, this show is sponsored by 3 entities. If you guys get a chance, please check out American Military University. It's a great school for online learning. Guys, it's a school that values what we do in corrections. So if you want to go back to school, bring experience into the classroom, American Military University is a great school. Again, supportive of me, but more importantly, supportive of the profession. We also have Guardian RFID, from inmate tracking and cell checks to cloud-based businesses and artificial intelligence. Guardian RFID digitally transforms jails, prisons, and juvenile detention facilities of every shape and size. Visit GuardianRFID.com for more information. Guys, they also have a YouTube channel, so if you get a chance, please check out Guardian RFID YouTube channel. They got some great video that will get you familiar with the technology that they use. We also have the RAP, controlling combative subjects quickly and in an upright position so they can breathe has never been more important. Departments such as Washington, D.O.C., L.A. County, San Diego County, and hundreds of other facilities across the U.S. trust and believe in the RAP restraint. Now that's RAP, W-R-A-P. So go to saferestraints.com. That's safe restraints with an S.com for contact information. And mention Tier Talk to receive instructor training at no cost. Lower liability for your facility and your personnel with the RAP. Give the RAP a call today, 800-WRAP-911. If you aren't familiar with the RAP, we also have a link to that in our description so you can see exactly what the RAP does. So, without further ado, let's bring on my guest. First guest comes out of Connecticut, and she's a famous author, a famous podcaster. I could see her. The thing is, guys, is they're kind of like in this room, so I could talk, and they really can't do nothing. So I could introduce them any way I want. But having said that, I think the joke's getting kind of old because no one's laughing anymore. And I see Connie, she's like, hey, Angie, just get me on already. Come on, man. It's Tuesday. I don't know what Tuesday's new to anything, but Connie. What's up, Connie?
Oh, my God. Hello. I don't know what to say right now. Oh, so hi, everybody. Connie, Alleyne. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. I'm the podcast host of The Fly Behind the Wall and the author of The Cage Was Her Cocoon. Of course, Anthony calls with this 5 P's discussion, and I'm like, okay, this is something else we're going to explore. So I'm looking forward to seeing where this dialogue goes.
Yeah, I think this is definitely something that we haven't explored in this way before. We have explored about unethical behavior, obviously, but not this way, and I think this is going to be very interesting. And then I made a promise. Connie has an idea for a topic. So next time we have a discussion, it will be Connie's topic on a competitive working environment. Is it healthy? Is it unhealthy? I think it's a great topic. Guys, forgive me. Next episode will be Connie's topic. Connie, thank you for coming on today's show. I appreciate you because I know you wanted your topic, but I will have that topic ready. I don't know who I think I am sometimes. I just don't.
I don't know, because I don't mind. We could talk about anything. It's okay.
That's guys. She calls the wife, and she could force me to pick topics. Trust me, she could force me to pick topics. But guess who else we have now? The reason why I wanted to have Gary on, I know Gary's been busy lately. He's working out in Hollywood right now, becoming a celebrity. But Gary is very familiar with ethical, of course, but more importantly, unethical behavior. And I think that he would be a great addition to this topic, being a retired prison inspector. So, Gary, thank you for coming on. I know you've been busy. Let me ask you a question. How was meeting Dean Cain?
Pardon me? Oh, Dean Cain.
Dean
Now,
Cain.
I'll tell you what. He is really super friendly, Dean Cain. He played Superman in the Lois and Clark TV series, and I got to shoot an afternoon of filming with him for an upcoming true story out of Florida, human trafficking in Florida, called Not for Sale. My part was small. It was just an honor, though, to be not only with the people filming this, but it's the concept of the film. It's heartwarming. We're telling the story of these girls that are being trafficked here in Florida, and victims of human trafficking. It's just sickening that this happens, and I'm glad they're putting this 3-part miniseries out based on a true story here in Florida. Anthony, I think your concept tonight is really good, and it's to talk about ethics in this way, in a different manner. Like you said, people talk about ethics, and then they think automatically an officer slept with an inmate. Well, yeah, that's corruption and ethics, but like you said, there's ethical dilemmas every day, and if you get into one of them, it doesn't mean it's criminal. It doesn't always have to be a crime to be unethical.
Right now, guys, the way I read this out of the book was they filter it based on the golden rule. How we treat others is how we should expect ourselves to be treated. And basically that's something that's accepted in multiple religions. It's just a wide spread belief. Now, the thing is when we're talking about ethical here, it's an expectation of how we should treat each other. So at that point there, it's not so much that all unethical behavior is illegal. It's just, hey, I think that's unfair that I was able to do this for you, and then you in return did not do the same for me. So again, just to kind of give you that definition, because we're going to filter the dialogue through this definition and really bring out maybe some specifics that we feel can apply to this profession. And then maybe if you guys could think of any behavior that relates to this, you could obviously comment below. But ethics is based on well-founded standards of right and wrong that prescribe what humans ought to do, usually in terms of rights, obligations, benefits to society, fairness, or specific virtues. Being ethical is doing what the law requires, but ethics also consists of the standards of behavior our society accepts. And we're kind of pushing towards that last part that I just said, basically what we expect from each other. So what I would like to do first, so we can understand where the perspective is coming from, I'd like to kind of get Connie's and then Gary's definition of what they feel ethics means. Muted, Connie. The professional podcaster is muted.
Oh my God, I can't.
Love it.
All right, so I feel like we know the basic standard operating procedure in the facility, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, what's ethical, what's unethical. But in my mind, as we talk in this context, I am thinking, what is the right thing to do, right? And are we doing it? Not only are we following policy, but are we really being our brothers and sisters keeper? Are we being forthcoming with information that could be helpful? Are we holding back information? I also think about it in that, as we start to deal with sort of some of the challenges in the facility, sometimes bureaucracy, the politics of things, you know, do we end up compromising what we know is right in order to sort of meet the expectations of whatever those pressures are in the facility? And so I look at it as we're doing the right thing even though no one's watching, right? And sort of the unethical side of that would be just the opposite, right? It's a good person who's kind of still doing what they know they should be doing, but somehow they're not quite doing it the way it should be done. I don't want to go into too much detail because I know we got a lot to explore as we go in through those 5 Ps, but that's sort of how I look at it.
No, but I agree with you, by the way. I think that when we're talking about ethical or unethical behavior, I mean, as we break down the 5 Ps, it really is. I want people to realize that these are the way we're doing this. This show right now is it's not people that come in with that unethical mindset and just do things because, you know, they feel they can. This is about people that can get turned into it. And I think that's where it becomes it becomes a little bit more of a further discussion as opposed to someone who already has that corrupt mindset. This is where I want people to know that at any point things can happen to you and you have to be able to step above it. And that's kind of what we're having the dialogue. Same thing with inmate manipulation. You know, we can walk around saying it won't happen until it does. So same thing here. I want people to know that sometimes there are people that commit to unethical behavior. And again, I definitely don't want to say they're victims, but having said that, they weren't bad people. They just made a bad choice. And I want to try to help people have this dialogue and realize that there's ways to get out of these choices so we're not trapped in situations where we're forced to choose between something ethical and unethical. Hey, Gary, what's your thoughts on what we just said?
Well, I agree with everything that you and Connie have said. And, you know, there's other ways as well. Treating your coworkers in a certain manner, being a jerk to your coworkers, okay? That acting in an unethical behavior when someone asks you for help or assistance or a new officer comes up to you to ask a question and you brush them off and treat them as if they don't even exist. That's falls under unethical behavior. Also ignoring some of your job duties when you know if you ignore it, it could cost dearly in the end if something bad happens. I don't want to give away too much because we're going to go through your list there and discuss some of these things.
Right. So the first thing I want to go, guys, there's 5 Ps. The first P is pressure. Now, right off the bat, when I saw the word pressure, I automatically thought peer pressure. So we know that exists, right? So we know peer pressure can get us to do foolish things or lie on reports if that could be a concern. But as I went in a little bit deeper, I was like, it's got to be more than just that. So one of the things I thought of real quick is maybe the pressure from the agency to make us productive. Now, I noticed here, one of the things they mention is when there's added pressure, sometimes that comes to the temptation to cut corners or bend the truth. Now that makes total sense to the world we live in today in corrections. There's a lot of pressure right now for us to produce, but having said that, we may not have the resources to do it. So I had a few incidences I want to bring in mind that are specific to what I could recall, which could make someone maybe do something that's unethical. Now, mind you, we're going to talk about these things, then I'm going to kind of break down at the end of each word, like pressure, we're going to talk about ways to avoid that. So one thing is I was thinking about from a frontline perspective, let's say from an officer's perspective, is I know there's a lot of officers right now that work intake and have to do constant watches. And there's a lot of pressure for them to, you know, make sure that they're able to do both, which I find to be unfair. I don't think you can do both effectively. I think that it only takes 1 second for you to be at the intake to get distracted because you get focused on the intake and you know what's happening here, security concerns, especially for an intake, and your mind may be not really focused on that constant watch. But having said that, some of us, because we're pressured to do the job and we don't want to say that we can't do it, we wind up falsifying logbooks saying that we were able to do both. That every 15 minutes we're able to check on this person, and we're also doing intakes. And deep down inside, even as a good supervisor, I could probably know that that's not happening. Sometimes you get people that, especially with understaffed facilities, you got officers that are covering multiple areas that are actually saying that they're touring each area every half an hour, when you as a supervisor may realize, well, that's not feasible. But the officer may feel the pressure to do that because they feel, well, if I don't do my job or if I complain, then I can get myself in trouble. So having said that, they wind up falsifying the log. And then when shit hits the fan and they go to look at, like, hey, why weren't you doing these tours? And the person goes like this, well, we were understaffed, or I don't know, I had an intake that day. Okay, I get all that. And those look like to be major concerns. But in the logbook, you say that you were doing these things. So the problem is, even if you had these concerns, those concerns are not reflected in the logbook. That's why, again, the pressures to do the job, if you feel that it's not feasible, then you need to write those concerns and you need to forward it to your supervisor, and that supervisor needs to do the right thing, because a lot of us, again, we get concerned of how we're going to be perceived if we say that we can't do this. And last thing we wind up doing is, okay, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and log that I'm doing these tours. And when deep down inside, you're not. So again, I'm talking about the pressure to be productive from, maybe the higher ups to do those tours, when in actuality, you're understaffed. So you got multiple areas. So you're not really doing them every 30 minutes like you say you are, or you've been working with this intake for 30 minutes and, oh shit, I forgot to go check the constant watch, but don't worry. Oh, they're okay. That's fine. I'll just put down that I checked them twice when in reality you didn't. So again, the pressures to be productive may make you think that, hey, let me go ahead and do some fixing into that logbook. Connie, what's your thoughts about? I'm talking about, like, right now. We'll talk about the peer pressure. I think I'm going to leave that with Gary, because I'm sure Gary has dealt with a lot of investigations where you probably had one good officer that got peer pressure into doing something foolish. But what's your thoughts about, maybe even from the medical side, about the pressure from the agency that demands something from you and you're just not able to do it, and some people will still try to say that they've done it?
So I think in this space of us all being short-staffed, there may be some unrealistic expectations of the staff, right? So I know in the medical side of the house, even in the mental health side of the house, dental side of the house, right? We have these caseloads that keep growing, right? And every day it's an expectation that you see X amount of people every day. But you have this pressure coming from your central office saying you need to get this done. But realistically speaking, you're doing everything you can to get that done, right? But then what happens? And I'm not saying this is what everyone does, so please don't get me wrong. Here's my list. I may have seen everybody, but those visits aren't quality visits, right? Like, the standard of care was not met based on my encounter, but at least I could document that I saw them. So you have the pressure of your central office. And then let's not forget about, okay, it's count time coming. So there could be the pressure of, I need to hurry up with this encounter because count time is coming. And so I can't do everything that I should have done in this encounter as I'm trying to manage my clinic, right? Whether it's a chronic care clinic, or it's dental trying to treat someone's infected tooth, or it's mental health trying to finish this group up, right? Here's all the stuff we're expected to do in addition to documenting everything that we are supposed to do. But you've got the pressure of time sometimes because you've got count coming, or you got the pressure of even the officer. You got 3 people out here waiting for you. You got to hurry up, right? I've had that experience. Or the pressure of your central office. How come you weren't productive today? How come you only saw 3 people? How come you only saw 6 people? We expect you to see 12 a day, right? It may not be feasible, but you're doing your best, and you don't want to end up in some sort of progressive discipline situation because you're not meeting their performance expectations.
Yeah, I want to add something before we get to Gary too, is that I want to put a little something on management too, because we both talked about how people can overwhelm someone to be productive, and that person not wanting to be considered a failure will unfortunately may do something unethical. We talked about logbooks, or maybe rushing through checkups or whatever it is on the medical side, or maybe even on the program side, saying that you're seeing people that you haven't seen, just to kind of keep the list moving. When you're looking at management has to also understand the process. You have to realize that what you're pushing out, is it feasible? Again, I don't want to push everything on frontline saying you're wrong for doing it. We'll get to frontline and discuss, some ways to kind of balance this. But I just want to push something up to management real quick. When you're pushing out these things, in the back of your mind, are these things feasible? You should know, right, before you push it out. And if you don't, how about you go talk to the officer and see what it's like for them to do the job? Because, again, some of them may be concerned that if I don't do it, I'm going to get in trouble. So I'm going to just fake the funk. But in the end, are you really pushing something that's just not feasible? And at that point, I kind of put both parties at fault. Of course, I put the front line. You falsify guys. If you couldn't do it, you got to report it. But I also put management out there, too, for, pushing something down that just isn't feasible to do. Gary, I thought from one end, yours, I thought that was going to be something that's definitely in your wheelhouse, is the peer pressure. Obviously, you've done a lot of investigations. I'm sure peer pressure can turn a lot of good officers or a lot of good staff into doing foolish shit.
Well, yeah, and I have one that management made a decision, and it ended up being a huge investigation. Management from above was telling everybody, from the lieutenant down to the sergeants, you're going to get this done. You're going to make it. You're going to do it. No matter how you got to do it, get it done. Well, an officer was sent on hospital watch with an inmate that required, by policy and procedure, 2 officers at all times. But they sent a female officer with this male inmate to the hospital that required 2 officers. And without telling big, long story, she got beaten up very badly, real bad. The inmate escaped, was caught outside the hospital by the Bartow Police Department. And she, the officer, was beaten badly and still going after the inmate, chasing him all the way downstairs outside to the hospital. She no longer works for the agency. It was just too much mental stress that she had after being beaten that badly. So, there's pressure on sergeants and lieutenants to get the job done from up above. So they cut corners. They cut a corner and they just sent 1 officer, and it turned out to be absolutely terrible incident, and cost them actually an officer who ended up leaving the department.
You're
muted.
I knew that too, and I told myself I was going to make sure I'm unmuted. But could I tell you something, Gary? I'm glad you said it first, because Connie did not get to retaliate off mine. Because she wanted to
say you're muted, but I tried not to be loud about it.
But Gary came in and said, Connie, not today. Gangi, you're muted. I got your 6. One of the things, guys, is as we continue to talk about pressure can make us do foolish choices to create shortcuts. That's the key. Bend the truth, more importantly, to create shortcuts. And we have to be mindful of the decisions that we're making under pressure to make sure, are we making the right decision? Are we making the wrong decision? Hey, Gary, real quick, I still want to talk about the peer pressure, because I came up with 2 forms of pressure, guys. If there's more, let me know. But I came up with agencies' pressure to be productive. But I also came up, obviously, we have to discuss it, the peer pressure. So Gary, can you mind just breaking in some peer pressure real quick?
Well, we've had some bad investigations over, unfortunately, a supervisor telling an officer, you're going to say you did this in the report. And the officer is not willing to do it, but now they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And the officer is thinking, if I write this in my report, it's untruthful. But if I don't follow my lieutenant's or captain's orders, then am I going to get in trouble? Or are they going to outcast me as not a player? Unfortunately, we've had these things happen. And in the end, not only does the supervisors get in trouble, but the officer who put that in their report. It's a terrible situation to be in when peer pressure is having you do things, or officers who are telling another officer, don't worry about that inmate, we're going to get him and pay him back. And they get that officer that doesn't want to be involved in payback to an inmate. That ends up many times in an investigation. And peer pressure caused this officer, who would never do this on their own, to get mixed up in that kind of horseplay and garbage.
Yeah, I love what Gary said, because the pressure comes from the fact that, am I going to get retaliated against, or am I going to be an outcast? So again, you have someone that's good, that has right intentions, but, you know, again, they get caught up with some bad officers or some bad staff. And then the concern is going to be the pressure that, okay, I'm in a profession where we have to be together, and I don't want to get retaliated against by my peers, but also more importantly, I don't want to be an outcast, because I know how that could feel as well. Now, one of the things that John Maxwell mentions that helps people make the right decision is going to be, knowing, well, let me just say his exact quote, because I don't want to ruin it. In order for me to make good decisions under pressure, I need a reminder of what's at stake. Now, he's also a very religious man. So he says, first, I'm accountable to God. Second, I'm accountable to my family. And I keep reminders of that all around me. So even in his office, he has pictures of his family. So when he's stuck in a position that, he's pressured to make one choice over the other, he looks at who he's really accountable for, which is his family. At the end of the day, they're trusting me to make the right decision. They're trusting me that I don't do anything foolish. More importantly, they're trusting me to be that steady provider. So in the end, that tough decision, it makes it a little bit easier when you know who you're, who you are accountable for, which is, again, your family. Now, one of the just a couple of things that he mentions here that also helps us make the right decision when we're under pressure is you want to ask yourself these questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run these questions through, and then I would like to ask Connie or Gary what their thoughts on any one of these questions that are asked, and then we'll move on to the second P. Okay, so the questions that you want to ask yourself that should help you make the right decision is, am I going to make a rash emotional decision? Am I going to compromise the truth? Am I going to take shortcuts? Am I going to keep my commitments? Am I going to bow to others' opinions? And am I going to make promises that I can't keep? So all these questions here are great questions you should ask when you're stuck with a decision that has to be made under pressure. Connie, any one of these questions stand out to you?
Honestly, they all do, because they all make you pause. They all make you think about the decision that you're going to make. One of the things that, really stands out to me is the emotional rash one, because a lot of times in the heat of the moment, right, someone says something that upsets you, right? Like you have an exchange on the corridor, you get a call from someone demanding something, or you get an email, everyone's emailing these days, right? You get an email that's in caps or like that's in red, right? When you have that emotion in you, like you want to respond right away, and one of the things that I've practiced throughout my career is that when someone has been able to rattle me in that way or get under my skin, that I won't respond at all. I won't make a decision in that moment, because I know that my emotions may be clouding my judgment, and I may be able to still make a good judgment call. But the reality is that you've got to be able to take a step back so that you don't do that, right? Because then your ability to say sorry and to fix it or maintain some semblance of a professional relationship with that person is now compromised, probably forever, right? They're never going to forget that rash decision or that rash response that you made. And even worse, when you're making those emotional decisions, have you really thought out all the options, right? Is this the best decision? Or is this decision just based on your emotions and the outcome is going to not be so favorable? So certainly I feel that, as we kind of go through this, a lot of the time, it may just be a matter of us pressing the pause button so that we check ourselves, right? Because there's usually something internal to us that lets us know that this decision we're making is wrong or that it's questionable. And I think, you know, sometimes people just ignore it, but it's there because there's times where I've felt that feeling and it's like, okay, maybe you shouldn't do that. As much as central office has pissed you off today, that wouldn't be the right thing to do.
One of the things, I beat you. I beat you.
That's all right.
One of the things that get to me is am I going to take shortcuts? I think to me, that's a question where I think shortcuts are more of just an easier road for the one person based out of convenience. And at that point in corrections, you don't want to take shortcuts. Shortcuts lead to serious threats to the facility, threats to the people that you're responsible for, which obviously leads down to keeping my commitment. As a manager, am I doing my best to make sure that I provide my facility, make my facility as safe as it can be for the people that are working there? You know, so they kind of bleed into each other. And at the end of the day, even with the people that hire managers that are operating on facilities that are understaffed, where you're combining posts and, you know, cutting personnel because, again, maybe you're understaffed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this officer cover 2 posts. You know, when you're starting to do that, that could be seen as a shortcut, and that could be seen as going against your commitments to keep people safe. So again, you know, to me, that's a decision where it's like, you know what? I'm going to have to live with that if something happens. So I love those 2 questions right off the bat. Am I just doing something that's easier for me as opposed to for the team? Gary, what's your thoughts on any of those questions?
Well, I thought I was after Connie, but shortcuts. I have one for shortcuts. That's the one that was on my mind as well, Anthony. You know, you're an officer in a dorm or a housing unit, and you say, you know what, we haven't had any movement since the last count. You know, some dorms are on 15-minute counts, some are on 20, some are on 30. So you know what? Nobody's left. I know that. I'm not going to count this time. I'm just going to put down that I have all my inmates. Well, that one shortcut you just took is the time when an inmate hung him or herself in a cell, and you just missed an attempted suicide, which is now a successful suicide because you took a shortcut and skipped the count.
And that was a great scenario too.
That's a big one.
Yeah, that's a very big one. Good one, Gary. Because I know a lot of people that I wonder if they're actually getting up and doing those mandated counts.
Yeah.
So, but I'll write in the logbook that I did. That's definitely a good one. And again, just born out of convenience. You know what I mean? And then the problem is when you do something out of convenience, that could eventually become the norm, the routine. Because if it worked once, let's try it again. The second one is pleasure. I want to read a couple of things that he mentions about pleasure. So he mentions that the fact is that the pleasures most of us pursue are short-lived and leave us unfulfilled. Right off the bat, I'm going to think about those relationships with the inmates that are on due and then lead to sexual encounters. I know there's more, and we'll get to it, because there could be pleasure in retaliation, and we'll get to that. Connie has a story about that. But I want to read this poem that's from Robert Browning. It's real quick. He goes, I walked a mile with pleasure. She chatted all the way, but she left me none the wiser for all she had to say. I walked a mile with sorrow, and never a word said she. But oh, the things I learned from her when sorrow walked with me. If we allow it to, the desire for pleasure or comfort will take us into doing things we'll regret afterwards. What's the answer to the law of pleasure? And that's what we'll get to. Oh, but by the way, guys, so again, when we closed off on pressure, those are the questions. I think that's great, and have that focus of who you're accountable for. So for pleasure here, I'll have Connie go first, because the obvious thing, I guess Gary can discuss the one with, the immediate impulse to, have that sexual activity with that inmate. And I have something that we can kind of lean into with that, which covers on pleasure, because pleasure is more about instant gratification. Now, if you take that as that meaning, if you take pleasure to mean instant gratification, that can cover a couple of things, which includes what Connie mentioned before, and we're bringing up today, retaliation. So, Connie, you had a story about a clinic once?
Oh, okay. So, I think that there are times where you may have like that very persistent, annoying inmate, right? And they show up time and time again. You don't know how they get on your list, why they on my list again, all the laundry list of things that they said was wrong. We've already checked the boxes. And so being able to put that inmate on a waiting list or remove them, you know, it's there's this good feeling that comes along with that like today I was able to get a little respite from this pain in the tail, right? Like, because what is my reality? You know, any other day I am dealing with this boy or girl who's crying wolf. And so, you know, I don't want to say like, oh yeah, this is a common practice, but this is a way that like you get that instant gratification that today I don't have to sit and do sort of this word joust with this clown because I have to, right? Because we have to address every person, whether they're crying wolf or not. So I think that's one of those instances where we do get an opportunity to actually have a little bit of recourse and feel good about it because we know nothing's wrong with them. But of course, on the flip side, it is that one day that they come down with some sort of sign or symptom that we needed to address and we didn't.
Yeah, and by the way, guys, that also falls into maybe management chasing after an employee, messing with them and doing what they can to eventually get that person in trouble when everybody else maybe you're offering assistance to, but because you don't like this employee, you're going to let this employee drown. I could see that happening. And again, ethics and unethical, we're talking about this is our relationship to each other. Whether you don't like me or not, are you giving me the fair opportunity that I deserve? So if you're helping everybody else, but you're just allowing me to drown, I figure that's unethical behavior, because if I was to do that to you, how would you feel? And again, there could be immediate gratification in that, but in the long run, I think that does take a toll on the individual. Hey, Gary, what's your thoughts on pleasure? And be careful, Gary. That was an open. Be careful. Wait, hold on. There's got to be a better way to ask that question. Hold on. Gary, what's your thought on the word pleasure as it relates to compromising staff?
Well, have you ever heard of a situation or heard of an investigation where you actually have 2 or 3 officers or even one officer watching another officer about to do something wrong, the wrong way, and allowing it to continue, even though it could turn out to be bad, what this officer is going to do, could get the officer hurt even. And they're laughing about it, joking, saying, look at this dummy, look at this officer. Let's see what he does. Let's see what he does. And allowing it to happen as if they're getting pleasure out of watching this officer fail. That really burns me up when I hear about those kind of things. You should be, as an officer, you always hear the saying, I got your back 24/7. I got your back. We watch out for each other. Well, things like this have occurred and bad things have happened. You've got to go help that officer, say, hey, you can't do that. This could happen. This could cause this, or this could cause that. But basically steering your officers in the right direction, not allowing them to go in the wrong direction.
Hey, Guy, I want to ask another question, because obviously being an inspector, could you see retaliatory behavior from inspectors that are maybe trying to, investigate a staff, but they just can't get them, but they think that they're doing something, so they wind up doing foolish things, that maybe setting up some evidence or something like that to kind of, I'm going to get him either way, because I may not be able to get him for this, but I think I can get him for this.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. We've had inspectors arrested right here in Florida. You've heard of frontline staff placing evidence on an inmate, or we've even had frontline staff here in Florida place evidence on another officer to get them in trouble, to get them out of the way, because this guy wanted the same girl that this other officer was dating. It's crazy, some of the things that happen. And yes, don't think prison inspectors are not, unfortunately, just like some officers, taint the image of other officers, some inspectors taint the image of other inspectors. And God, I would hope that they would never twist it. I had a good supervisor, he read everything with a fine-tooth comb, and he always told us, we will just let the chips fall where they may. even if we think in our mind that they probably did it. If there's no evidence, there's no evidence, folks. But if you have an inspector, and we've had some in Florida, for falsifying investigative reports, get terminated, and we've had a couple get arrested. It happens, Anthony, unfortunately, you know, in every profession, but it happens with inspectors as well.
Yeah, and again, as we take pleasure and we define it as instant gratification, I could see retaliation fitting into that. You know, and obviously the pleasure aspect for pleasure, I mean, obviously that comes into what's been discussed multiple times on this channel, the undue relationship leads to maybe a sexual encounter or just the benefit of that undue relationship, because we're talking about instant gratification. So again, I came up with retaliation, but if you guys could think of something that kind of deals with that instant gratification. But one thing I want to mention, guys, is even when it comes to retaliatory, you know, you better think it through. Are you acting on emotion right now? I mean, there have been times where, you know, you have one person that gets upset and they quickly go to write an email. And in that email, no, not a good time to send it out on emotion. Because then when you read it, it's like, oh, I can't believe I just sent it out. Yeah, you should have took a second and breathe. Because right now, if you would have received that email, how would you feel? That's not a way to de-escalate. You're more about proving your point, but just in a very aggressive manner. And at the end, the way you're doing it is just going to make the other person resistant. So instant gratification can definitely get us into a lot of trouble because, again, it's kind of impulsive. Now, two things that they mentioned that will help us deal with instant gratification or pleasure is I like this, guys. If you know you're special, if you know you're especially susceptible to pleasure that would tempt you to cross an ethical line, put yourself out of harm's way. That's number one. Let's just briefly touch that. If you feel that you're an officer, and this kind of touches into what we discussed before, and you're getting overly involved with an inmate, you should go talk to your supervisor and kind of say something before it gets worse. Before it gets worse. That's not easy to do. I get it. But in the end, guys, the choice that you make is going to affect people that trust you. So you're going to have to step up and do it. And it's okay to say, you know what, this job isn't for me. Right off the bat. This job isn't for me. Because in the end, that inmate's going to get a hold of you. And next thing you know, what could have been settled at the beginning, if you would have admitted it, now becomes criminal charges because, you know, the inmate's got all the leverage. They're setting you up, and now you're putting our life at risk. And that's when it becomes unforgivable. It becomes unforgivable when you cross that line and put our lives at risk. And the other avenue is the second key is to develop discipline. And one of the quotes he has here by Richard Foster is, the disciplined person is the person who can do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. Hey, Connie, what's your thought on those two solutions? Muted. I'm not even going to edit that out. I'm done editing out. I'm just done. I'm going to let it play out.
Oh my God. Now I lost my train of thought because of that.
We're talking about, so I don't mind talking. We were talking about, you know, if you're faced with pleasure, to admit the temptation, you know, and kind of get away from it. And the other thing is having that disciplined mindset.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the disciplined mindset for me is probably the one that resonates the most, because I think that also ties into the remembering your why, right? Like it's hard for you to get pulled into something or reacting in a way that would not be ethical when you remember why you're there, why you're doing it. And I think the tool of remembering, or at least even envisioning your family, right? Those are the people who count on you and who really matter outside of this arena. I also, you know, as I'm thinking about it, I think that the discipline is something that you work on, right? And so that there's a level of intentionality behind working to develop a level of discipline, which means that you have an awareness as well. So like, I think those are really great strategies to lean on.
Yeah. And Connie, one of the things they mentioned here is if pleasure is about the immediate need for gratification, then discipline is about to delay that gratification. And one of the things he closes off on for this part, he goes, anyone who loves pleasure more than truth is headed for trouble and will take others with them. Hey, Guy, what's your thoughts about, you know, delaying gratification, keeping that disciplined mindset, especially when it comes to pleasure.
Well, Connie's exactly right. You have to work on yourself to discipline yourself. So Connie is 100%. I always tell people, protect your future. Know every day when you walk into that prison or jail that you're going to have an ethical dilemma of some type, probably every day, whether you realize it or not. They're going to approach you with ethical dilemmas. Situations are going to come up. Train yourself to move away, report it, stand back, but especially go talk to a supervisor or report it so that you're covered all the way around.
Yeah, and guys, again, for people to think that it can't happen, I think, as we covered the first two P's, I think that these are thoughts that we could strongly relate to, because if it wasn't us, we could see it happening. And maybe more importantly, we could see it happen to people that we thought were on point. The next thing is power. I know I'm going to start off with Gary and Connie, because Gary's done a lot of high-level investigations when it comes to people in power. I just want to read a little thoughts here from John. Many of the recent scandals in American business have developed because executives abuse the power of their position. For a U.S. president, as U.S. President John Adams said, no man is wise enough or good enough to be trusted with unlimited power. It says people are especially susceptible to power issues typically experience a cycle that follows this pattern. First, you have the reception of power. Power itself is neutral, like money. It's a tool that can be used for good or ill, but it can be dangerous, especially for people who achieve success quickly and easily and receive power before they are ready for it. So again, it's not earned power, it's just given you. Then that turns into the abuse of power. One of the dangers of power is that those who are entrusted with it begin to make it preservation their primary concern. So they start worried about preserving the power. They don't understand that the power they have been given, whether it's business, government, ministry, or relationships, has been bestowed on them for the purpose of service to others. Those who want most to keep their power at all costs are most likely to compromise standard ethical behavior to keep it. And the last is find the loss of power. Inevitably, anyone who abuses power loses power. Abusive CEOs, like dictators, are living on borrowed time. Gary, you have investigated people that held the highest of powers. Maybe they themselves thought that they had absolute power, and look where they wind up ending up. So, I mean, what's your thoughts on the power aiding in people's compromising ethics?
Well, the reason I'm smiling, I think I know one case you were talking about. I'll make two quick ones. We had a secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections who went to federal prison. He was sentenced for 8 years. I think he got out 15 months early. But he was embezzling money from inmate canteen funds and taking money up to $12,000 a month in his pocket and doing some other things. And he was in charge of the entire Department of Corrections of Florida, which is third or fourth largest in the nation. And here he is running around the state embezzling money. Power really got to his head. I did a chapter on that in my first book. And another form of power that I've investigated on the male officer side and the female officer side is telling an inmate, if you don't do this for me, I'm going to write you up and you're not going home in 6 months like you think you're going, because this is going to put a DR on you and put some more time on you. Two forms of using your position of authority in the wrong manner and letting power just get to you and make you crazy.
Yeah, I think that's why we also have to be very careful of the people that we hire into the upper levels. I think that we should kind of get an understanding of how they're going to utilize that power beforehand. Sometimes I agree with like certain corporal positions or certain positions that kind of try you out first, because at that point I'm not giving you the position of authority yet, but I want to see how the people take to you. Because again, I think a lot of these people that fall into abuse of power are the ones that are all about their position and nothing to do with the relationship of the people. All they do is push their position to try to get that respect, and then they wind up abusing it, because in the end, people don't respect you. If you're just going to use your position, you're not going to get that respect. Hey, Connie, what's your thoughts on the abuse of power?
I mean, I think we've seen it unfold in many ways, and I can relate. I've seen the example that Gary used of, if you don't do this, right? I mean, I've seen it with inmates, and I've also seen it staff against staff, which, you know, it's uncomfortable for anyone who witnesses it, to say the least. But it's also, you know, it really does say a lot about the person who's in the position of power, right? Because that person is leveraging their power in a negative way. And, you know, we've always had that conversation, right? Like, do people follow you because of your title, your power, or do they fear you, right? And so the respect is not there. And, you know, the word does get around that you're using your power to almost divide or pit staff against each other. Like, I've just seen it in so many different ways. I would just, in as it relates to power, you know, we all have to be mindful of that leverage. And I think part of us in the environment and actually seeing power be misused, I know it's scary and it's uncomfortable, but someone has to say something, right? Like, I think that's part of the pressure of the environment as well, that we see these things happening and we're forced to move or to do what this authoritative figure may have told us we need to do. But it's honestly, sometimes that power pushes us to do things that aren't ethical, right? And it's not always, we don't know. I'm trying to choose my words wisely here. I'm sorry,
I
but
think if can I add something with that,
yeah,
Connie? But I'm just going to say something. I want you to finish. Power. I think I know exactly what you're getting at, because as I'm listening to you speak, what I'm getting one word that's coming to my mind. So I'm just going to give you the word and have you go with it. I'm seeing control.
yes.
So is that what you're looking to try to get at?
Yeah, I just, you know, in this instance where someone has control, right? They have the power. They can force people to do things that are not ethical, you know, especially when people are just trying to maintain their livelihood. And, you know, whether we see it in staff that are on the same level, or we see it, you know, at the highest levels, it's just understanding that the misuse of power can drive people to act in unethical ways, and they normally would not have done that.
Yeah, and guys, again, that's why I'm saying, you know, when you give someone power, you give them a level of control. So at any point, guys, if that person abuses that level of control, I believe that could be very devastating to our workforce. Very devastating. So I like what they touch on, because again, we try to give solutions. So again, if you're that person with the power, I mean, sometimes it's hard to, you got that person, kind of like the retaliation aspect, right? I don't like you, but I'm in a position to make your life miserable. So one of the things that they mention here, and I love what he says, he takes a quote from President Truman. He said, take the advice of U.S. President Harry Truman. He recommended, if a man can accept the situation in a place of power with the thought that it's only temporary, he comes out all right. But when he thinks he is the cause of the power, that can be his ruination. Anyone who realizes that he's guarding his power too much had better start examining himself for breaches of ethic. Power can be terribly seductive. I like the idea of the fact that the power, you are not the cause of the power. The power is on loan to you because you're trusted with it. So therefore, if I'm trusting you with the power, you got to do what's right, because at any point I could take that power away. I see you in agreement with that, Gary. What's your thoughts on that, on Harry Truman?
Well, I love that quote. And I think that when you think you are the reason for the power, you are the golden statue, that's when you get in trouble, because then you think you're untouchable. You think that whatever you say is golden, whatever you say and have people do is the absolute truth. And that is not the case. You have to be humble as a leader. And when you're given power, be humble and don't abuse that power.
Yes, and guys, again, I think this is a good dialogue. We have two more P's left, but I think we're covering some good examples here. We're trying to be as specific as we can with the profession. Now, mind you, these are books that were written for the business world, but they do apply to us. The next thing is pride. So I'm going to explain how this works. It's basically about having an exaggerated sense of self-worth and how it can be destructive. So when we talk about pride, pride is about, me believing in myself more than I believe in anybody else. I'm the main person. I'm that man in charge. I want to be the best. I don't care about anybody else. So it's a very isolated type of behavior, if you ask me. Now, one of the things I was thinking about when it came to pride is how can pride be destructive? Now, mind you, we're talking about how we behave towards each other. That's the key. So I remember when I tried to get into the gang world and I was trying to understand the gangs and trying to figure it out, I didn't really notice at the time how much of a power trip this world is. So what I mean by that is when I was trying to get into the gang world and try to get educators, a lot of people that didn't want to share information with me that were my fellow officers because they were considered the top dog, but they were maybe insecure in their position. So they didn't want, to train me. And then all of a sudden I become that top dog. So one of the things you have to do as an agency is be very careful when you praise somebody. Because if you praise somebody as if they're the best and they're the only one that can do it, they start kind of embracing that. And they start taking that in to the point where they want to remain the best. So they're not, if I get a chance to train with this person because I want to learn, they're not going to tell me a lot of stuff. And what they start doing here is they start hiding information that's valuable because it's not about what's best for the agency. It's about what's best for them. So I know this could happen in any areas. I'm sure when you start telling someone they're the best at doing something, they start to kind of take that in and maybe they want to remain the best. But I remember for me, I saw a lot of pride with the gang investigators who just wanted to be that top person to the point where instead of helping out the facility, they were just more about themselves. Connie, I know you got a response to that. What's your thoughts, Connie? I saw that, Connie. No, what's your thoughts? I'm curious.
I mean, listen, I think, as we talk about this whole creating a sort of this competitive or we working in this competitive environment, I feel like there's so many times where we have that star, right? We have that person who's just absolutely great at what they do. And, so I think, we probably misuse and abuse that person, right? First and foremost. So I want to acknowledge that person becomes the go-to for everything, right? But I feel like we can't, I think, yes, that person can take pride in their work and what they're doing. But I feel like that person, as we talk about like training, right? Like if that person is, I don't know, like I had a nurse who was just great with wound care, right? And I would actually have her do little in-services so that everyone could become great with wound care. And she took pride in that, but I could see the flip side of someone taking pride and deciding, no, I don't want to do the in-service. I don't want everyone else to get the goodness that my experience has brought me, right? And, I think as an institution, we lose out because we could be developing people in a great way. But, that pride piece, I think, it could be the gift and the curse.
Yeah, the first nurse you mentioned, her pride came in the service of others. Not so much that she was the best in this, but that she can share that information. Where the other person was more of a pride as in regards to competitive. Like one of the things he mentions here is that the point that each person's pride is in competition with everyone else's pride. Now, what you want to get clear is that pride is essentially competitive. It's competitive by its very nature. It's the comparison that makes you proud and the pleasure of being above the rest. And it says pride is not an easy thing to conquer. Now, guys, I like what Connie said because it's very important that Connie said this. We're not saying not to have pride in your work. But having said that, it's when the pride comes from comparison. So I want to be the best. I mean, think about that. I want to be the best. Well, that means that if you want to be the best, you're not going to elevate other people. Because in the end, you're more concerned about the title of being the best and actually kind of, helping out the team grow. So I love the fact that you mentioned that because I don't want people. I mean, I know pride and ego kind of have a different definition. But in here, I think people are getting the message that we're talking about pride. We're talking about to the point where I'm so high up here that I'm going to push everybody down, and I'm going to do whatever I can to keep them down there. And we were talking about one story before, and guys, by the way, this is not Russ, but we've used Russ as a scenario because Russ is considered very good at searches and stuff like that. And by the way, this isn't Russ, but we're going to use him as an example because when I bring up an example of Russ, I'm bringing up the dedication he has and let's say his service to get the job done. Now, Russ was considered the man when it came to searches. Now, imagine me as a supervisor. I know Russ is the best, so I want Russ to teach other people how to do searches. Now, if Russ was the kind of person that was selfish with his skill, and he went in there and said, well, you know what, I'm not going to really give everybody everything, because if I do, they have a chance to be better than me. So not only is he selfish with his skill, but he's also insecure in his own position of how good he is. Now, the problem is, he not only is he being unfair to me, again, it's not illegal, but not only is he being unfair to me, he's being unfair to the people that now are investing their time with him to become the best. So again, it kind of brings that relationship where it's ethical and unethical. But I thought this was a very good one. Hey, Gary, what's your thoughts on pride? I'm sure you know, I wanted to mention something too. Me and Connie were talking about this in the car. What about if you have investigators that have so much pride that they don't want to admit when they're wrong? Could that mess up the case and the truth behind that, the integrity behind that case?
Well, if you have an investigator that doesn't want to admit they're wrong, it's going to go back to what we talked about earlier. They don't want to be proven wrong, so it may cause that type of investigator to do something illegal, falsify a report to make them the winner. Say something that isn't true to make things work in their way, which will cause them to get arrested or terminated or both. Another example I had is, have you ever seen the officer, and this is partially the supervisor's fault as well, that seems to be the go-to officer for this supervisor, always this one officer. And that officer starts to build up this pride and ego, I guess you'd call it. And you're on the way to the supervisor's office to turn something in, and they stop you. Where are you going? I'm going to the lieutenant's office, turn this in. I'll take care of that. I'll take care of that for you. You go ahead and get back to your dorm. Now, you're both officers, but this officer has built up some kind of pride and ego now that they think they're a supervisor.
Sorry about that. I realized I made a mistake. It should be a correctional officer. So I deleted it. I put an correctional officer. Remember, can go in front of a consonant, but and needs to go in front of a vowel. How come none of you guys caught that? Was it your pride? So obviously we got to do something that helps people with that. So one of the things I like here, and I would love to get Connie's thoughts and Gary's thoughts on this, was pride can blind you to your own faults, to other people's needs, and to ethical pitfalls that lie in your path. I mean, think about what we just said. I'm up here, but I'm not willing to give you anything because I don't want you to take my place. So, I mean, do you find that to be a good definition of, how pride can lead someone to compromise?
So I absolutely think it can. I think it's a great definition, so when you think about it, you're so full of yourself, right? That you're blinded to your deficits, right? You're blinded to your areas of development, or you're blinded to where you may have made a mistake, right? And then you have to think of it, that piece about not being able to see others' needs, right? Your pride has got you so blinded that you're the only one important. And it prevents you from acknowledging that there are other people around you that need your support or need whatever it is they need from you in that capacity, or whatever capacity you're serving in. And what was the last part of that?
Basically I have it right here. So basically how you view yourself,
right.
Obviously how that could affect the people that are next to you. And the last part of the social pitfalls of, I'll give you the exact verbiage. So it can blind you to your own faults, to other people's needs, and to the ethical pitfalls that lie in your path.
Right. So you might not even think that they're ethical pitfalls because you're so full of yourself, right? Like that thing is above me. Like I'm above that thing. That thing is not going to be a hindrance or an issue for me. So, you know, I think when that pride is in there and you're really feeling yourself, because clearly that's what's going on, I think that's when you are probably more likely to fall into that ethical pitfall.
And this may go into the dialogue that we're going to have in a couple of days with Connie, because the pride can also lead to a highly competitive environment. But it's okay if you have a competitive environment. We'll be discussing this in a couple of days, as long as it motivates mutual growth. It's not okay if it becomes so competitive that we're hiding information from each other because we're looking to be number one, as opposed to for us all to grow. So I think pride takes a big part of that. Hey, Gary, what's your thoughts on that definition?
Well, after listening to both of you talk, two words come to mind: fair and impartial. If you're full of yourself as an investigator, you won't be fair and impartial, which you have to be when you do an investigation. If you're full of yourself and you're working on the front line, you're not going to be fair and impartial with your employees. And the example you gave about Russ, if he wasn't fair and impartial, he would hide some of the information about how to do a good search so that he could look good, which we know he doesn't do that. He's going to show them the correct way, but that was a great example. So fair and impartial comes to mind with me.
I like how we both made sure that we get the right message out about Russ. He's a pretty big guy. You know what I mean? So, again, so guys, this is just pretty much knowing yourself. I mean, I think that's the best way to do it. I mean, are you doing it for the right reasons, or like the pride in your work? I like Connie. I think the example she said was more about the person that had more pride in sharing the work. I mean, I think that's great. I'm sure Gary would agree that, you know, I think you get these experiences, but it's great to share those experiences so other people can learn, because that kind of helps that service of others, but more importantly, creates that legacy. Because the people that taught me valuable things, I've never forgotten. I think that's what we do at Tier Talk. We provide value, and I like to think that we will never be forgotten. I know I don't forget Connie and Gary. Every time I call them, they're always available. Maybe. I don't know about you, Gary. Gary's fucking hanging out with Dean Cain. You know, hey,
Man, I'm working on that other book too for that publisher that I have now. So I'm between the farm and that, I'm pretty busy.
Well, you know that we're going to definitely promote that book as well, because everything you've done so far for the profession, I mean, it doesn't even just help us directly in the profession. You're giving people that are going to school an understanding of what it's like, if you know, being on the inside, which I think is great. Get those minds when they're young. The priority one, this one to me was the most valuable one, and I'm going to say why me. Yes, everything has value, but for some reason this made me think of something. Okay, so for me, I remember why I took this job, and I remember the promise I made that I'm going to do whatever I can to hold this job with integrity, sworn oath, all that stuff. That always has to be my priority, the internal drive, if you will. I think that when we start to shift to being motivated more by consequences, negative consequences, as opposed to the internal motivation of, you know, having that integrity and stuff like that, I think that's when we start becoming questionable in our actions, because at any time an inmate can minimize those consequences, or anytime, you know, we can ourselves minimize it, you know, and then at that point the consequences just aren't enough to hold us where we need to be. You really need that internal motivation, something that inspires you to do the right thing. I'm going to use the word inspire because that's from the inside out. And I can think of a story real quick. I thought this is a unique story. And again, I'm trying to relate it to an example. So when I talk about priorities, it's shifting the important to the unimportant. Okay, so I want that to, so the unimportant becomes first and the important becomes latter. So think about that. If most of us were only motivated because of external consequences, we would have a lot of corrupt people. Thank God we have people that are motivated because they're inspired to do the right thing. They believe in the oath they took. They have integrity. So that keeps us really having good people in this profession. I think Connie said it before at the beginning, you know, doing the right thing when no one's watching. That's the definition of integrity, and that's what we want. Not doing the right thing because of the consequences. No, you know, that to me does not provide the right motivation. You know, it doesn't. You know, so one of the things I was thinking about was, I remember a story a while back about an officer that came in with the right mindset. You know, you would talk to the officer and it was all about doing the right thing and, you know, definitely not screwing up, definitely not screwing an inmate. That was the key of this dialogue here, you know, working at a female facility. So you had an officer that just had the right motivations to begin with, but eventually the officer starts kind of building this rapport with this inmate. I hate the word rapport. I'm trying to learn not to use it. I believe a rapport should have something beneficial in the end that can help the agency and help the people that work for the agency, But either way, so when you're starting to talk to this officer, at first you can see an officer that's really defined by, me and Connie used the word before, moral authority, if you will, just kind of doing the right thing. And then what happened was you could see that the inmates started to have an influence, because when the officer would say it's not even worth it because in the end I have a family, just all the right reasons, the conversation started to shift. Well, if it could happen, we could, you'll probably never get caught if you did it in these areas or here or here. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, that changed from, not doing it because of integrity, your family, stuff that you're holding yourself accountable for, until now it's about the consequences of not getting caught. And it's like, well, wow, that's a real shift in priority, because one, to me, is a great inspiration. I'm going to say inspiration for the first, because it's coming from the inside out. But the other one is a very bad motivator, because if anybody's good with their mouth and they could build some trust with you and they can minimize those consequences, all of a sudden that's really not enough to hold weight. So look at that. The important was what? The moral aspect, the integrity. So now that becomes secondary to the consequences of the negative behavior. That becoming primary. Look at that shift. To me, that to me is a foolish shift. But that's my scenario. I'm sure Connie may have another thing when it comes to switching priorities.
Yeah, I don't know. When it comes to the priorities, I think that as you attempt to meet your obligation in the facilities, like I guess in my mind, right, the facility is very fluid. And so those priorities will change, and you have to be agile enough to be able to change as the priorities change. But I think the bigger challenge comes when you are trying to manage the pressures and you're trying to manage the power and you're managing everything else, and that priority steps in, that there is a shift. I think you've got to always be mindful of where it's shifting to, and not just kind of be on autopilot, which I feel like a lot of us are in. And sometimes when we're just trying to get things done, even though, priorities might be shifting, I think there are times where we might fall into an unethical pitfall because things are changing so rapidly. Now, your example of the officer and, well, we might not get caught and there's no cameras over here. I think that's like a whole other situation, right? But, I guess I have to think a little bit more of an example where, priorities might change and a good person might fall into a pitfall unintentionally. And it could just be the speed at which priorities are changing.
Well, I could help you out a little bit, Connie, if you want, because maybe I could read this off. Because I think what I said was pretty much a very important priority switch. What they say here is anytime a person doesn't know what his priorities are, he can find himself in trouble because he's liable to make poor decisions. It's one thing to define your value. It's another thing to live them out. So the key here when they talk about solving is that what really matters is if you haven't defined your values, I encourage you to do so. Then work hard to keep the unimportant from becoming important and the important from becoming unimportant. So it's more about the values. Would you agree with that then, Connie?
I do agree with the value, but I also think there is an assumption that you have. So I think the values are who you are, right? Like they're in you. But I think as priorities shift in facilities, we may not always have the time, I think, to make sure that we're in alignment with those priorities. So I'm just trying to think practically, what does that look like when there are shifting priorities in facility that aren't so black and white, where you aren't necessarily clear what should be the priority?
Yeah, and I think actually when it comes to that, I mean, hopefully that's where it comes to those choices where you kind of go back to saying, you know what, let me ask these questions about myself to make sure I'm answering this, whatever's got to be done, or I'm making the right choice based on maybe some of those questions that we asked about before. Am I making a choice based on emotion? Am I trying to take a shortcut? Am I breaking away from any commitments or promises I made? But I think that's a great perspective, Connie. It's not easy. I mean, I was able to give one scenario, but again, I do agree with the fact that if you don't come in with any defined value, especially in this profession, because I think it's the internal stuff that makes you unshakable. So if you don't have anything coming in with that not defined, then if you don't know where you're at, then you're going to be, you could be led to anywhere. But if you come in knowing that my stable ground is on these, these traits, these characteristics, these values, then no matter where this is where I know I have to be. It's a great way to filter, especially any of the games that inmates play. Hey, Gary, what's your thoughts on the shifting of priorities? Do you any specific examples?
Well, every day when you walk through that gate into that prison or that jail, you have to tell yourself, what is my priority in life? What is my priority with work? Who do I owe my loyalty to? Well, for some, that's God, family, and the agency you work for. And I like it when people say those things, because they know when they walk in that if they do something wrong, they're gonna make they're gonna hurt their own family. They're gonna make their agency look bad, and they're gonna destroy their whole world around them. Okay, and you have to walk in there not being an empty shell. If you're an empty shell, when you walk into work at a prison or jail, that shell could be filled with anything from inmate manipulation, temptation, and all those kind of things. Don't walk into work with an empty shell.
I like that, Connie, right? That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Hey, Gary, you should make that a shirt or your title of the next book.
Don't be an empty shell.
Oh, you know what you could do? Maybe you could tweet it and Dean Cain could share it.
Do what?
He said you could tweet it and have Dean Cain share it for you.
Either him or Ben Stiller.
Oh,
yeah.
Don't forget, I worked with him too. That you're going to bring this up. I wasn't going to bring it up.
Hey, Gary, I wonder if Ben Stiller and Dean Cain do the same thing. Yo, I met Gary York, the author of Corruption Behind Bars, and a special guest on Tier Talk.
I bet they called each other right away.
Oh, man. So, hey, guys, so I think it was a great topic, something we haven't discussed in this manner before. It went a little over an hour and change, but again, the information's there. I don't believe in breaking up shows sometimes, because the information is needed. There's going to be someone that needs it right now. And I don't think they need to go on our time schedule. If we're able to kind of run it, let's run it. Hey, Gary, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Folks, I know it's the end of the video now, but if there's other officers that you think could benefit from this video, please have them watch it. I really like the way Anthony led this video and broke it down into sections. I think it's a very important message that needs to get out there. Thank you all for your service, and please stay safe. And I think what we talked about today could help you stay safe.
Yeah, and maybe, Gary, if you get a chance, maybe you could, because I know that you have the true prison stories, maybe you could break down the 5 Ps on your channel as well. I think it would be interesting to hear, that perspective from the, a total perspective from maybe the investigator side, the inspector side.
The power the power one, especially.
Yeah, I thought this was spot on, and Connie, of course, obviously, love having you on. One day she'll invite us on her podcast.
Lord have mercy.
I
can't even catch a break. Gary, he gives me no break, Gary. I haven't even recorded a podcast because I am always available to him.
Well, I had to bow out because a couple of times because I had some things to do, and I had to say, Anthony, I got to do some other stuff here first.
Yeah, it was also my fault for calling him at 2:30 in the morning too. Gary, I have an idea. I'm asleep. What I mean? Hey, Connie, what's your closing thoughts on this topic? I mean, just from any side, civilian custody side. I mean, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the key to us being successful in this environment is to be self-aware, right? I mean, the pitfalls are always going to be out there. We know what the right things to do are, right? Like if you are facing a situation and it seems above your scope, right? Like, so I think about the person who is falsifying, the logbook, saying they're doing it when they're not. Like, you just need to document, you need to escalate that to your supervisor, right? Like when we get these hot potatoes that kind of push us into a corner and make us feel like we have to compromise ourselves or compromise our work ethic, like I think we shouldn't hesitate to escalate those things, and don't take those steps that are going to jeopardize your career.
Yeah, and guys, I want to add something else too before we close is, when you're seizing that golden opportunity, be careful, because sometimes we get so concerned about ourselves and that position. And me and Connie are going to touch on that this week, that we really will do whatever we can to get that opportunity, especially if the facility or the agency we work for have limited promotions. All of a sudden, what should be bringing us together, maybe working each other, studying with each other, and best one gets it, but we still stay supportive of each other, turns out to be a highly competitive environment where we wind up just losing trust for each other. And at the end, after the test is done and someone's given the position, we're so worried about me, that we don't support the new person and we just isolate them. So again, I think that's unethical too. I think that's another dialogue, and we'll be having that in a couple of days. If Gary's not too busy, I'm sure he'll join in on the discussion. But I think that's a powerful dialogue. Healthy competition versus, competition that's not so healthy. As always, guys, we show us here. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. The bell's going to notify you anytime you post a video. Now, before we go, I'd like to ask one thing personal. I'm going to try to do what William Young does and try to keep people holding on. So if you guys stay towards the end of this, then maybe you guys can also answer the question. And it also tells me if you stayed long enough to watch this video. Now, the other day we did a shout out for a young lady, and she actually did comment the exact time the shout out was done. So it proves to me that she does watch the whole episode. So today I'm just going to ask something personal. Gary, what book has motivated you the most?
What book has motivated me the most? Wow. That's a hard one because there's quite a few out there. But I'm just going to have to say, it sounds crazy, but when I was in the military, I read Military Leadership. And that's kind of stuck with me my entire life, because an 18-year-old boy going into the military, and then you read the Military Leadership book, and then you go on and get promoted to sergeant and staff sergeant. It stuck with me forever. Now, I use in my videos still some of that information, because that Military Leadership book may be old, but it still holds true today to many things we do. That's probably one that has stuck with me the most.
All right, and Connie?
So you asked me this one, and it still remains the same. It's Who Moved My Cheese? It's one of those where, it really keeps you on your toes. Things are going to be changing in your environment all the time. How do you make sure that you're always prepared and not have to get prepared for the change?
Mine's kind of a toss-up. It's between The Toughest Job or The Cage Was Her Cocoon. Written by two great authors who did not once mention inmate manipulation, Decoded. But I digress. I just want to end this making these two guys feel horrible that my book did not quite motivate them. I'm just joking. As though if I could choose one, I'm really enjoying John Maxwell's books. I find to have a lot of power behind his words. But again, I'm trying to do my best to take theories from other professions and bring them into corrections, and that's what led to this dialogue here. And then obviously the forward thinkers that we have on the panel that enrich the dialogue. Obviously, we couldn't apply any of this if I didn't have thinkers like this on the show. As always, guys, the show is Here Talk. I went through the ending, and I hope you guys all stay safe.